Hey there everyone, what's up? Back today with another impressions video, and today talking about a PSP game, and it's not all that new, but it's relatively new, maybe a year and a half old, I think. That's not new, really. Whatever. Today we're looking at Conception, ore no kodomo, unde kure, which is basically, please have my babies. So, okay, stop. Stop. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is a porn game, and why am I talking about this? Not a porn game. It just sounds like a porn game. It's just horribly named. How about that? So, since it has this horrible name, uh, Conception, please have my babies. Um, yeah, it's the kind of game like you. I don't want to tell people I'm playing because I feel like I have to preface it by like saying it's not a porn game. It's not. It's actually a third-person dungeon crawler. But let's talk about the game itself. So the basic story is that you're this high school kid and you get sucked into this kind of other world. It's like a alternate dimension where it's like a fantasy alternate dimension, so there's like castle and magic and stuff. But so there's a bunch of character classes that are very fantasy based, and the basic story is that you're sucked into this other world as a something called a marebito, which is like a imagine like it's like a savior from another dimension. I guess is like the easiest way to explain what marebito is like. So essentially, what I've already said, but the you're there and you have kind of come to this place and they're in this big uproar because usually once every 12 years or something there's a maribito that comes that saves them from one kind of monster that appears every 12 years or something, but it's a different one every 12 years. But the problem with this time is that they're all 12 have appeared at once this time, so it's kind of like a unprecedented kind of like thing. It never happened before. So that's the basic story. So you're trying to defeat all these monsters in 12 different dungeons to progress your character and to get back to the real world, I guess, is your option. And that's the basic story. But the gameplay is really what's important. It's a dungeon crawler, and the basic way to explain it is that it's on a very basic level. It's pretty similar to Persona 3, but only on a basic level. So the battle system is totally different, but the look of it is very Persona 3. Your main character is a kid, like a teenage kid in a school uniform running around various like themed dungeons. It looks like Persona 3, but it looks similar, and there is a kind of I want to say how would I say that? It's like there's like a kind of bond building system between characters, but it's dissimilar to how Persona does it. Essentially, you have 12 characters that you can build bonds with, and they're one kind of priestess for each sign of the zodiac, and with each of these priestesses you build up a bond between you, and through that bond you can make characters for your party. And the party creation system in this game is really why it's interesting, and it will explain the creepy name. So with these characters you have a bunch of kids are your kids actually are your party member, and you can have up to 12 at a time. So really you have your character and 3 party slots, and each party slot is like a one character, except it's made out of 4 kids. So you have to have 4 kids to make one kind of group for your character. So it's like having a 4 character party made out of 13 people, which is one character is you, and then you have 3 groups of 4 in your group. So it's a pretty cool system, actually. Besides the creepiness of like having like the weird kind of ritual to have the kids born, and I will say it's not like sexy at all. Like there's like there is actually like kind of porno saxophone music in the background, and basically it just like shows a silhouette of the girl, and then you like hold hands, and that's it. I mean, then the kids pop out of like Russian nesting dolls. That's really how it happens. So like, there I guess it could be like implied that they're having sex, but there's nothing shown that would actually show that. So I guess if you want to think they're having sex, then go ahead. If you just want to think they're holding hands and doing a ritual, which is very possible because that's all it shows, then yeah, think that too. It doesn't really matter. It's actually it's less creepy that way, actually, in a lot of cases, depending on who the girl is. But anyway, so basically, you just visit them every like if you go into the dungeon, a week passes, and each time you come out of the dungeon, you can visit 3 girls to talk to them to strengthen your bond. And if you have a stronger bond, you can obviously make stronger children. So it's pretty cool actually because the children each have a class, and you can make a character kind of specialized with different classes. So you could like make a real specialized character. So like you could have, for example, there's classes like fighter, thief, mage, but there's also like kind of second levels of those. So like you have a monk class, which is like kind of a hand-to-hand fighting class, and then you'll also have like a berserker class later on, which is like the leveled up version of the kind of hand-to-hand fighting class. And then there's also special unlockable classes that you have to find in the dungeons that have special abilities that are different from all the other characters. But when you have these groups, you can make your characters. So like if I wanted to have 4 berserkers in my party and just make like a full berserker party, you could do that. It's fine. Or you can like make a kind of balanced party with a berserker and like a sage or some kind of magic knight or something. There's a lot of classes, so you can kind of customize what skills you want in each party, and kind of make it how you want to play it. They also have elements you can give them. You can give them resistances and elements. It's pretty deep for how you can make your parties, and that's one of the most interesting parts of the game, I think, at building the parties. The dungeon crawling it's pretty basic actually. There's kind of a few levels, so you actually have 12. You have 12 boss battles, but you have altogether, I want to say 12 plus about 21, 22 dungeons, I think, altogether. Um, each dungeon itself is 5 levels, and then you'll have a boss. So, but there's 4 like main areas of the things, and they're split into 3 areas of 3, and then you have 2 areas above that which are like mini bosses that aren't related to the other things. So it all comes together to 22, but I think it's 22. I'm trying to remember. There's like some extra stuff after that because I don't want to spoil the story, but there is an extra dungeon. But so I spoiled it. But you do have the option to, there's a lot of different dungeons, but you have this kind of thing going on where you might want to think you like would grind because it is a dungeon crawling RPG, except the battle system, it really doesn't encourage you to grind to level up, which is interesting. It's actually like a pretty good system because unlike something like like a normal dungeon crawler where you want to run through and you can fight your battles really quickly and get a lot of experience and get better items and level up, this game doesn't really encourage that. Let me explain. The battle system is not like your standard turn-based. It is turn-based, but it's not your standard kind of like turn-based battle system where you like select your command and then just battle back and forth. It's not like that kind of like Rock'em Sock'em Robots type of back and forth attacking like a Final Fantasy is or something. But it's got like a pretty large amount of depth. Like the most amount of monsters you'll have to fight at the same time is 3, and they're scaled to your level, so it doesn't really matter if you're low level or high level, except when you get to the boss. So it's the dungeons themselves actually like. You don't have to fight everything, and it's probably better if you don't, only because it takes a long time to do the battles. The battles themselves, you'll have, your 3 or your 4 groups plus 3 groups of monsters, and it's built on a kind of square system where I I think it's a 3x3, so you have like a kind of 3x3 grid. And it's not on a grid, it's actually in 3D in a room that you can move between. But it's basically grid-based 3x3. And you have to, when you fight the monsters, actually, you have to worry about not only the area of the monster where you'll be, but you have like a kind of circular pattern around the monster, so you can flank on either side, or you can go behind or in the front when you attack. And this positioning of your characters around the monsters is actually rather important for how you pick the strategy of the game. So some monsters can attack strong in some directions and not strong in other directions, and they have special attacks in some directions and no attacks in other directions. So you'll have to learn strategies to beat every monster, and you have to also keep track of monsters in grid positions behind you and on the side of you, because you can't attack them, but they can attack you. So it actually makes you have to think about your positioning and where you're placing each party member around the monster when you attack. So it's pretty deep strategically, like when you fight monsters. But because of that, each battle is long. Even with 3 monsters, you can't zip through battles. In some cases you can. Like when you get strong enough, like really low level monsters, you can touch them and they just explode. So it doesn't go into a battle system. They just kind of zap out of existence, which is it's cool, but it never really comes into play all that much, except for like really low level dungeon parts, because uh, mostly the monsters are scaled later on in the main dungeon parts where you're going to fight the bosses. So you never really get quick battles, and even towards the end of the game, like you can go back to the earlier dungeons if you felt the need to, and you still have to fight everything almost, because you're usually not strong enough to zap them out of existence. So it actually, because of that, the game actually encourages you to just run around the monsters. You don't have to fight anything. They all kind of rush at you, but they're really slow moving, and you can kind of dodge them for most cases. So I found, like, after playing for a while, that I hardly would get experience for fighting things, and it would take like each battle would take 5 minutes or something, and that's like kind of a pain if you're not getting any reward for it. So you just find that you just avoid monsters until like you get to lower levels of the dungeon, where like the battle actually takes about the same amount of time for the weak monsters, except that you get experience for it. So it's kind of like it's a pretty good way to prevent you from just running around and over leveling from grinding, because it would take forever to grind, and it would not be worth it, because you can pretty much get through the game without grinding at all, which is actually a good thing. I enjoyed that about the game, that I didn't have to grind at all, and I could avoid a lot of battles and still be powerful enough to defeat everything with a good strategy. So that was a pretty important part of the game that made it fun. But let's talk about the bosses. All the bosses have like a kind of their own setup. They have their own power levels. They have their own type of affinities and weaknesses. So you'll have like a fire themed monster that's obviously strong against fire and weak against ice. You have that kind of thing, and then you have some other monsters with certain special attacks. So like this monster attacks really strongly in one position. So like you have to avoid that position all the time. Or some monsters attack in wide ranges, so like you'll have like 3 areas around the monster that are dangerous, but it's not like incredibly strong. So you have to think of strategies for each boss, which is it's good, though in some cases I found myself like I could use the same strategy for almost all the bosses without any trouble, and I could almost ignore like what their weaknesses were, because with the strategy I came up with for each one, you could basically just make characters with no affinities. You could make your character without any type of special abilities, and you could still win with a good strategy, which is also, I guess it's I guess you could really plan out everything for your characters for each boss battle, but I found that like I didn't really have to. If I came up with a good enough strategy, I could just beat everything using strategy instead of using kind of exploiting weaknesses and things. So I guess it does offer a lot of options depending on your playstyle, which is a good thing. But There were some downsides that I didn't like about this game. Uh, I didn't like the dealing with the building bonds with the priestesses and stuff. It actually I was not interested in them. They're all kind of like anime stereotypes, I guess. Like, this girl is really shy. This girl is like a depressed artist. This girl is a sexy nurse. This girl is like over overly intelligent scientist. Like they all have that kind of like generic kind of theme to them. So I found that like I didn't really care about any of those characters. So like you have to build your bonds with them, but like I found that like I just got tired of doing it. Eventually, I was just kind of like skipping all the dialogue after a little while, which which is kind of like screwed me in some cases because like I missed certain points that I had to do. But I don't think that's like a problem with me. I think it's a problem with like the game itself being not incredibly interesting in like one of the main parts of it, which was like the bond building. And I know some people will enjoy that kind of thing. It's just I didn't really. So like like for example, in something like Persona 3 or 4, for example, when you run around and you talk to those people in town to build your kind of bonds with them, their stories are usually interesting and like there'll be like some kind of thing that makes you care about all of those people. Whereas in this game, like you run around and they all have a story, but it's not really interesting, and they're mostly like these kind of anime stereotypes, which is not something I'm interested in. So it's kind of you know not a strong point of the game, though it should be. But I found that like with the mechanics of the game, it was fun to play, even though I didn't really care about the overall story. Like I just blew through it because like I wasn't even really interested in any of it. I just liked the playstyle, but it kind of wasn't strong enough to hold it all together. Towards the end, I was feeling like, oh, can this end? I'm just tired of doing this now. So, I wouldn't say it's like the greatest game ever. It's not like it's not something I would say is like on the same. It's not on the same level as a Persona game. It's probably like a bit lower than that. It's above average, but it's not like on my great list. But when the sequel comes out, I'll definitely buy it. So it's good enough to play. It's just wasn't one of my favorite games, but it's pretty interesting altogether. That's about it. I'm sure there's stuff I'm forgetting. I'm just doing this off the top of my head, as I do with all my impressions videos. So, but I'm gonna look at the back of the box here and see if there's anything I can, if I'm forgetting anything major. No, I think I'm okay. So this is pretty long anyway, so I'll just end this. This was, then again, this was Conception, or no, kodomo, unde, kure, which is please have my babies. And it is a good game, and frankly, you could import this game and play through it with no problems, I think. I think you'll find that, like, if you didn't care about the story, and I didn't really care about the story, I found that like I could really skip the whole story and still get through the game no problem. And there are a lot of like selections for your, like characters in conversations, except that even if you picked the bad choices, like it was really easy to get the levels back up by doing the birthing ceremony or whatever it is to have the kids. Like many times the kids would pop out with a special bonus for their like ranking up their affinity for each other. So your bond level could go way up really easily without even getting any of the questions correct on the in the conversations you had with the people, which was another reason that made it less exciting to read all those things, because it was just kind of like who cares, because there's another way I can update all this stuff. And most of the time, the first selection, you could just select the first selection every time, and after a point, it would always be good on the first selection. So it was like really unnecessary. Like you could, if you really wanted to test this game out, and you thought like, oh, I don't want to import it because I'm not going to be able to understand it, it's not even a problem, because you could get through the whole thing without understanding it, and you'd be fine, I think. it's none of the weapons, like even if you didn't know the names, you can look at the stats and see what is good. All the spells are, I guess you might have trouble with the abilities and spells, but you could just test them and see what they do. You know, you could you it's totally playable even without a translation. So yeah, that will be that'll be it, I guess. This game has a sequel coming out on the Vita. It might get a localization. There were some talk about that, but I don't really know. And I don't really keep track of whether games get localized or not. So I'm a bad person to ask. But this game, it's all right. It's not great. It's not super good. But if you like the concept and you really like the kind of idea of being anal with building like this your kind of ultimate party, it's really a lot of fun. You can kind of really get in there and mess with the stats of each character because of the way they're built into like sections of four basically. So it's pretty interesting that way. But beyond that, the story not so great, and the bond building, yeah, I wasn't interested in. But beyond that, it's a pretty good dungeon crawler though. If you like third person dungeon crawlers, I recommend it just on the basis of that the system itself is fun and the dungeons are relatively varied enough that you can enjoy it without really caring about anything else besides just dungeon crawl. So it's good stuff. So that will be it. I guess I'll talk to you guys next time.